Hi everyone, and welcome to today's lesson based around continuous line. So continuous line is something you may have viewed before. It's sometimes known as taking a line for a walk, and it's when you create a drawing without lifting your pen or pencil from the paper. Sometimes the drawings look a little strange and it can be difficult to not lift away from the paper. However, it's a very good way for you to practice your accuracy and control whilst drawing, which comes in handy when you're creating other works. For today's preparation, there's a few things you'll need. So firstly, your drawing materials, as usual, a pencil HB or below, paper or a sketchbook, a ballpoint pen, which can be black or blue, depending on what you've got to hand, and a sharpener. You're going to need a suitable space to work in, so make sure you've got plenty of space to draw. You should use a clear table or a hard surface with lots of room around you. And you'll need a clear view of the screen because you'll be drawing from photographs that I will show you in the presentation. So make sure, even whilst you're drawing, that you can see this screen. On to today's task then. And to develop our drawing control, we're going to create continuous line studies of different objects using both pen and pencil. So we're changing it up a little here, using some pens which will be a little bit different from what you're used to. The lesson objectives are set into two. Firstly, to develop our pen and pencil control through exploring continuous line drawing, and secondly, to critically analyse our outcomes and link them to our contextual research and our exploration. Again, make sure that you follow this carefully, that you think about your drawing and pay attention to the demonstration and the success criteria. As you know, you'll be using this in the end of the lesson. Before we start, I'd like to take a look at some artwork and we'll have a little discussion about some of the things that we can see in that work. So here are a few continuous line drawings. I think they're all done with pen, though some could be quite dark pencil. And you can see they're all quite different, but they've got a lot of things in common. Now, I would like you to pause the video here and write down all the different things that you can see or that you notice about these drawings. Now that you've resumed the video, I'm assuming that you've made your comments and a little bit of a discussion around this artwork. Moving on, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I noticed. So firstly, each of these drawings is made from one single line. There are no breaks or gaps anywhere, and you can see there's lots of overlapping. There are layers of line built up to help with the shading and tone, which then creates the illusion of depth or 3 dimensions. And you can see this particularly in the top right-hand image of the lady with her head tilted. You can see how this has been used to create shading and tone around the neck, in the hair, and in the eyes and the other features. There are also accurate outlines that in some cases are adjusted by another layer. So if you do make a mistake, and you can see this in the bottle drawing down in the bottom left, if it's not quite right, you can go over it and you can go over it again until you get it correct. And don't worry about making mistakes with this. There's some mark making, especially in the rocks at the top, and there's still shading and tone, and that gives that illusion of texture. And the outlines of shadows are added there to create the depth in the image, and you can see that in the bottles and in the rocks at the top. Now before we move on, your first task using a pencil is going to be to draw an image that I show you. But I've done an example. It's not the same image as you will use, but it is similar. So start with a sharp pencil and then work your way across the drawing, making sure that you don't take your hand off the page. And you'll see this in my demonstration, and then I will give you some success criteria to go along with it. Now that you've seen the first demonstration video, we'll go through the success criteria. And remember, if you can say the things that I point out to you now, then you will have done well and you'll be headed in the right direction. Remember, this is difficult, and trying not to take your hand away from the paper can also be a challenge. So if you do have to take your hand away from the paper, make sure you leave the mark where you know it is, and then once you've taken your break, start your pencil back at exactly the same mark, so you're not moving to somewhere else on the paper. Firstly, accuracy. I have accurately outlined the drawing without taking my hand away from the paper. I have made sure that my drawing is accurate by going over certain areas and adjusting the shape where necessary. You can see this in some of the leaves I have drawn, where I've gone round the outline to get the shape to look a bit more realistic. Use of line. I have ensured that the work was one continuous line, and I have adjusted and layered where necessary to create a convincing drawing of the object. I have also focused on using multiple lines to add more fine detail, and you could see this at the end of the video where I went back over to add in those finer elements. And then the additional elements. I have tried to create texture, shading and tone by building up marks. There is also contrast between the shadows and highlights, where I have concentrated on creating dark and light tones by using layers and adjusting the pressure. So these are all things you can think about when you do your version. Here is the image you will be creating for your challenge. And I do appreciate that it is quite a difficult image, so I've put some little guides there on the right hand side to help you with this. Firstly, start with the outline from the bottom left corner and build up each leaf or flower one by one until you reach the end. When you've done that, go back through the image, adding more details such as the veins in the leaves and the shadows in the flowers. If at this point some of the shapes aren't correct, go over them and adjust your drawing where needed. Remember to add dark and light areas, but you will probably want to leave this until the end. I'm not going to give you a time for this task, as you may find it challenging and you may want to restart. Either way, you need to pause the video here and then create your drawing. Resume the video when your drawing is complete. Now that you've had a go with the pencil, we're going to move on to use pen. Now there are some differences. One, the pen is more permanent, and you do need to be careful you don't smudge the ink. And two, it does apply to the paper quite differently from pencil, and you'll find this out for yourself. Again, I've done a demonstration video to show you, and I will talk you through the success criteria, but just watch the demonstration and then we'll move on to your image. This isn't the same image as the one you will be doing. Now we'll move on to the success criteria, and it's very similar to the pencil one. However, this time we're looking at your accuracy with a pen and your control of the pen in creating the continuous line. So firstly, accuracy. I have accurately outlined the drawing without taking my hand away from the paper. I have made sure that my drawing is accurate by going over certain areas and adjusting the shape where necessary. Use of line. I have ensured that the work was one continuous line, and I have adjusted and layered where necessary to create a convincing drawing of the object. I have also focused on using multiple lines to add more fine detail. And then additional elements. I have tried to create texture, shading and tone by building up marks. There is also contrast between the shadows and highlights, where I have concentrated on creating dark and light tones by using layers and adjusting the pressure. Now, as I said, these are similar. They are pretty much the same as the pencil ones. However, you need to translate this into your use of pen. Now that you've seen the success criteria, we're going to move on to the image you will draw. Now, this is a little bit different from the pencil, as changing the pressure will not have much effect. You can't press hard to get dark lines now. This time you need to use layering and marks to create your darker tones. Start with one shell and build it up, then move to the second shell. This image has a lot more contrast and detail. Make sure you add the patterns in the lines and the grooves and pay attention to the light and dark areas. You'll notice that one of the shells is a lot darker than the other, so I'd like to see that in your drawings. Again, there's no time limit for this, so you can pause the video and then resume when you've completed the drawing. So you can pause the video now. Right, now you've resumed. I'm assuming that you've had a go with the pencil and the pen, and we're going to move on to the main challenge. And this main challenge will be split into two parts. Part 1 will require you to create a more detailed continuous line drawing using pen, and for this you need to add texture and marks. Part 2 will then enhance those tonal values by adding shading and tone as an extra layer in pencil. Be sure to watch the demonstration videos carefully. However, they don't use the same reference as you will get, so that will make it a little bit more challenging for you. I'll move on now to the first part and the demonstration I have done for you. As you can see from the demonstration video, this one's going to be a lot more difficult than the first ones we did. Now with the pen, you're going to be drawing all those different branches and leaves. But remember, when I did mine, I used marks to give the illusion of leaves. I didn't draw each one. And I also tried to get the texture of the bark in there as well. So there's a few help guides to sort of guide you on this, and you can follow those through. So firstly, you need to focus on the outline. This is a bit more difficult due to the branches and leaves. Secondly, try to add marks and textures for areas such as the bark and the leaves on the ground. And finally, look at your light and dark areas and try to create contrast for more depth. Again, no time limit. You can pause the video now and then resume when you finish the first part. Now that you've done the first part, you should have an outline drawing that is similar to this. We're now going to start adding some shading and tone using a pencil, and you'll remember this from one of our other virtual lessons. This time you won't be using continuous line, but you will be looking at the light and dark, and you'll be creating an extra layer which adds depth to the image. And you'll see this in my example. So I'll let you watch that, and then we'll move on to a little bit of a guideline to help you with the next part. Now, as you've seen in my demonstration video, I was looking at creating the light and dark areas using the graphite pencil. To make this a little easier for you, I've changed the image to black and white. So this time you're working on your layering and your adjustment of pressure to create light and dark. And my tips for this are: focus on layering your pencil to create the desired effect. Start off lightly and add more layers where you want dark elements. Don't forget that you can add some mark making to create more textures and add further dimensions to your drawing. So this could be in the leaves in the ground or in the leaves that are attached to the branches. You can now pause the video, add your shading and tone, and then resume so that we can talk about the success criteria. Now that you've resumed the video, I'm assuming that you've created a drawing. We're going to come back to the lesson objectives because we're going to move on now to lesson objective 2, and that is to critically analyze our outcomes, link them to our contextual research and exploration. As always, remember that you need to think about how you approached your drawing and how you use the demonstration videos and the success criteria to create your final piece of work. Here's the success criteria, but it has changed a little bit to adapt to the two parts of this task. Accuracy. I have accurately outlined the drawing without taking my hand away from the paper. I have made sure that my drawing is accurate by going over certain areas and adjusting the shape where necessary. Use of line. I have ensured that the work was one continuous line, and I have adjusted and layered where necessary to create a convincing drawing of the object. I have also focused on using multiple lines to add more fine detail. Additional elements linked to the continuous line. I have tried to create texture, shading and tone by building up marks. There is also contrast between the shadows and highlights, where I've concentrated on creating dark and light tones by using layers and adjusting the pressure. Now this is for the pen aspect of the drawing. The shading and tone aspect, that is all about your use of graphite. I have added shading and tone as an extra layer to my drawing using pencil. To do this, I have concentrated on layering my pencil to build up darker tones. This works with the darker areas I have added in pencil. Now when you write your annotation, as always, there's a few key points. This needs to be a reflective paragraph about what you've done and how you could improve. So start with what you've created. Don't forget to write what you've actually drawn and why. And remember, there's always a reason for creating this work, even if it's just for practice. How did you create it? You need to talk about the steps you took. What was the process? Once you had an outline, what did you do? What techniques did you use and why did you use them? And then we can move on to what was successful. It's always important to point out what you've done well, especially when you're developing a project. This should link with a technique. So it could be the continuous line element or the shading and tone. And then how could you improve? Don't be too critical, but be honest. Which areas are you least happy with and how could you improve them? Be specific about what you want to improve and how you're going to achieve it. Now you'll notice that this was set as an assignment on Teams, so when you've completed the lesson, you'll need to photograph your work and upload it. Don't forget to photograph your written work too. If you have any issues, please contact me through Teams or via email. Now, good luck with the task, good luck with submitting it. I really look forward to seeing your work and hopefully I will see you soon.